Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is part 2 of the making of for my track Master Can't Stop Me with NLJ. None like Joshua. This is the sound design portion, and this is going to be a little bit more interesting than the arrangement elements because this was a very simplistic track. But while the sound design is still pretty simple, it's actually pretty cool. So let's jump right in. Right in the beginning,
Yo, it's NL.
you got drums and stuff. We'll talk about that when we get to mixing and mastering. That's generally how I work with this. But let's look at this little RP thing. So we've got a 9-voice super saw square thing, super square, I suppose. It's a square because the detune's up at 2, even though they're not on square side. Really what this is just a different distribution of harmonics that by default indicates that it's going to be a square. However, if you do the harmonic detune, which spreads apart the harmonics, which actually, as I recently learned, is actually a process very similar to the frequency shifter in Massive. With this, the way we're doing it now, the main number here is the opposite of what the frequency shifter does. Instead of crunching it up, it spreads it apart. However, if you do the divider, it will do what the frequency shifter does in Massive. It crunches it together. It's pretty cool. I didn't really realize that. And then the pluck shape is a bit different. Really what this is saying is that the higher frequencies are coming off really fast, but I'm also filtering it so the higher frequencies aren't really coming in at all. And because it's keyboard tracking, it's following it completely. And this is really just coming in here to carve off those higher frequencies. There's a little bit of reverb, and I'm EQing it, and it's kind of loud. It's going straight into the master. This is not a super complex sound. Don't believe I'm doing anything terribly interesting. Nope, the unison's all regular. This is pretty straightforward stuff.
To your left, front, right, yeah, for the room. No bevy.
Vocals, straightforward. These are samples from the Leviathan pack. Not unusual here. Now here comes the first fun part.
You can't stop me.
So this...
You can't stop me.
That's actually my voice. And I believe I still have the original recording in here somewhere. Nope, I got rid of it. I must have... I recorded it. Haha. Here's...
You can't stop me.
You
can't stop me. You can't stop me.
This is basically how I went about doing it. I have my original recording, which if I go to Sliced Beats and find the drag sample, was it 250 what? 255, so it's around there. Should tell you how old this track is.
You can't stop me.
You can't stop me. You can't stop me.
There it is. That's the original recording of that sample.
You can't stop me.
You can't stop me. You can't stop me.
Now, along with the Harmer treatment that I gave it, which was a bit overkill, I recorded it out again and pitched it and that kind of thing, and I used the formant shape and that kind of stuff. Which, like, I can give you the details of what I did specifically for my voice, but it's going to be different for every kind of vocal you apply this to because of where it begins. A higher frequency voice will require more, and a lower frequency voice will require less. But the point of this is that I used the frequency image format mutation here to essentially change the character of my voice so that it not only did it not sound like me too much, but it's also lower, a little more sinister, that kind of thing. I used Unison to kind of fuck with it a bit and, change some of the settings here. I changed some of the settings, and that made it sound like a thing. Oh, useful, Seamless. The sharpness is all the way up. The formats are down a bit, and the mix is almost all the way off, all the way on. And the reason for this is because when it's all the way up, and you pitch it up and down, the format does a really good job of keeping it in place. But I did want it to actually be lower. So that's why it's not all the way on. The scale is all our original stuff. Speed's original. I didn't really change that much. I messed with the unison to screw with it because full-on unison made it sound too chorusy. But this sort of profile made it a little bit better. But the biggest change was on the actual...
You can't stop me.
The why it sounds like that right now is because I time stretched it with the pitch setting. Time stretching and pitch stretching are basically the same deal. Different applications of different kinds of algorithms. I used the monophonic algorithm and I pitched it down a whole bunch. Looks like at 600 cents, so 6 semitones.
You can't stop me. You can't stop me.
That's what it sounds like without it. Here's 6 semitones.
You can't stop me.
I like monophonic because it introduces this kind of like ring modulated kind of sound to it.
You can't stop me.
It does a very interesting thing. It's not necessarily wonderful at actually changing the pitch of something, depending on the source. But most of the time, it can do interesting things. So that's why I opted to use it for this, and it did the job. So that was that. After that, we have bass. Now this bass is fun. This is actually a pretty old track. To show you how old, like I'm mentioning the 255 thing. You can tell. You can see I have quite since a lot more. Now, this is quite old, and this is around when I was actually first experimenting using EQ modulation, quote unquote, filtering for bass sound. I think I was even using. Oh man, I wasn't even using Patcher to make this. So I appear to have a layer of 2 things. I'm not totally sure why I did that. So I have some FM going on here, and what's going on is that this is actually pretty standard FM. This is a saw FMing another saw, which does interesting things. And then that second saw is being modulated by a third, and this third one is going out as well because it's a different pitch. It's actually, you can see it's very low pitch. It's modulating the pitch of the second one, and because that second one is changing in pitch, it creates a Reese of sorts. Now the real fun it becomes when we have this very, very low pitch sound coming out. Notice if I don't have the main one out. That's why it's being FM'd by the other guy. That's what that sounds like. Because of how hilariously low it is. It's so low that it doesn't actually sound like a pitch by itself, but when it's crushed up, it's still a level. It's still a value of volume. And when that gets crushed up against another sound and get into distortion, it affects it. It actually changes how it sounds. So that's the value of this, although it is being FM'd by the number 2 here. And this is just big old FM mess kind of thing. This is at default 2.5 because this is back when I didn't have my actual piano keyboard. I was using my keyboard to preview notes. Got my EQ doing the filtering up here. It's just being distorted and being come back, and then it does it again. Being distorted again, and then compressed up again, and then reverb. Now, the reverb part is actually very important. Just real quick, I'm going to go over what the compression does. Well, the point of the compression I did back in, because this also I didn't have a separate sub for things, which I really should have. The point of this is that the frequencies that are lost as a result of filtering can be brought back via the multiband. And if I do it hard enough, even though the sub gets pulled away because of the filtering, I can bring it back and it can be even. That was the theory anyway, but it does actually make for a very muddy low end. It worked for this because of how simplistic the rest of the track was, but I also may have high passed the original to fit in with the 808 up there. But we'll talk about that when we go into mixing. Yeah, that worked out. I basically did that again for the second time through. The point of the compression is that, like, once you do the filtering, if it didn't have the compression, it would just sound like nothing because everything got pulled away too hard. But we don't want to bring it back completely because we do want to still keep the fact that we had filtered it. So it's kind of just makeup gain, very specialized makeup gain. And I did 2 versions of the stack, so filter, distortion, EQ, compression, filter, distortion, compression, and then reverb. Now, the reason why the reverb is very important is because all the sounds that we have in the track over here are recordings of this. And we took them and we reversed them. This is actually a very old, very common technique to add kind of interest to certain kinds of sound design where you record reverb into it and then you reverse it. So the reverb, leads into the sound. That's what happened here. And then, as I described in part 1 of the making of the arrangement part, is pretty easy. Put the stuff down and then just kind of use the slip edit tool to kind of move around in between them to determine which part we actually want to keep for which moment we're in. And also, like I mentioned in the arrangement part, parts of this were actually deliberate. Like this part, I knew that I was gonna want that, and so when I made that pretty immediately. And then when it's reversed, it sounds like that. So every single bass was that. They're all sourced from the same thing. I just did more than one kind of modulation, and then I went through, and then there it is. Actually mixing it, did I high pass it? No. I mean, a little bit, but not really. I passed out some of the mud. The wonders of multi-band compression as such are as such that a lot of things can conflict, and it won't really matter in the end sometimes if you're lucky. So that worked out. This guy is a big old super saw that is too pitchy, and it's faded in over time. See, what was cool about this is that what I did is I have this automation here, which is the bass rhythmic automation, but then I am changing the output min and max automation for this automation clip. Now, the second one down here is this guy, which is a similar pad that's a lot louder and lower and still just as pitchy. It has this kind of like violinish feel to it that only really works because it's only around for so long. This Valhalla room here is the reverb automation. That's for the bass. We get sort of a burst of extra roominess, and that goes on and off with the bass, and it kind of makes it feel a little bit bigger during particular moments of modulation, which is pretty cool. It's more or less the same pattern the whole way through, but I change it every so often, every little bit. I forget what you are. Oh yeah, you're just a bass, because during the chorus.
You can't stop me. Call me Illuminati, who was naughty by nature, reptilian, and human bodies. You can party.
Well, verse, I suppose. I still wanted the bass to be in there, but so what I did is I just selectively disabled parts of the bass that were still there, and then I also filtered it with a low pass filter so that it didn't interfere with the vocals too much. Because I did still want it to be present. I didn't want it just to be the beat the whole time. So that was very important. What else did I do that was sound designy? This was, I guess we could talk about the kick. So this is a very simple, straightforward track. So this is a sample. It was from the break tweaker pack. This is called. That's what that is. And it's a composite kick, but it is a very obviously 808 sourced. I put it in Harmor. I put it in A and B, and then on B I engaged side, which is to say that it is now only playing the side, whereas A is only playing the mid, so that together it combines to form a stereo signal. That's the point of that. Essentially what's happening is that I have the speed shut off over time so that it plays the transient at its original speed, but then it slows down as nears the tail until we get a consistent and unmoving sub. And that's really all there is to that. I have sidechaining in here because I believe I'm sidechaining it to kick in a snare. I'll have to check that. Like I said, this is a very old track. That made it a lot easier to do stuff like, this. You might have thought it sounded like a very gritty thing when I was playing it independently, but that grit is almost completely inaudible when it's with everything else. And I didn't play. I didn't have it in the intro
Notice I'm above you. To your left, from right.
because I do have another kick in there, layered in there. It's just a very small kick.
Naughty by nature, reptilian and human bodies. You can party with a stupid supermodel. Take him.
You can just barely, if you're looking for, you can hear that kind of bellish tone in there with the kick, but that wasn't intentional. That was just how it sounded when I did what I did with it. It just happened to work out very well. So, yay, happenstance. As I mentioned in the part one of the making of for this track, this is probably the simplest track that's on the R Silent. So, with the possible exception of G sharp, that track is probably the simplest one. Definitely in terms of sound design. Really, there's only like one thing that was designed, but this track is still pretty simple. Kind of straightforward, and this illustrates something that was different for me. Is that I was trying to sort of go outside of my comfort zone and do something that is not normal for me, but still me-like. Obviously, it has bass in it that I do, that kind of thing. Cold, but the idea of only there being one bass for an entire track is something that just like doesn't compute for me. It still doesn't. It's still very odd that I found this to work so well, but it was such a diverse enough sound that it could survive the whole way through. And, other sort of supplementary, sound design, that kind of thing. And of course, there being vocals helped a lot. That there could be that filled it enough that I didn't need to really try too hard to fill it with something else. It just felt very alien to have another sound in here other than what was going on here. It's a very simple, to the point, groove-ish track. It's not really trying to fight its way into your attention. It's just it's there and it does what it does well. And simplicity can do that, which, again, is something that's kind of new for me because I am usually all about, complexity and confusion and just sounds everywhere and never really thinking about the groove or the theme, that kind of thing. So this was the beginning of me trying to understand how to cope with that. This was part 2, sound design. Part 3 will be about the mixing and mastering of this track, which is a little bit interesting. I hope you might find that valuable information. If you have any questions about any of this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.